Welcome to Integrate Yourself, everybody. I'm your host, Allison Pillow, and you can find me at pureenergypdx.com. Today we're talking about something almost all of us have dealt with at some point, knee pain. And interestingly, it becomes even more common as we move into our 40s and 50s. Not necessarily because we're older, but because most of us are simply moving less than we used to. When we sit more, hunch over devices, or skip over the foundational basics in our movement patterns, our tendons start to hold the shape of those positions. Then when we do try to jump into a workout, especially something like high impact like running, we often run into problems like chronic knee pain, shin splints, tendonitis, plantar fasciitis, and the list goes on. All symptoms of a body that lacks a solid foundation from the ground up. So let's talk about how our tendons actually work, because this is really important to understand as you get into training your tendons. Tendons are viscoelastic, which means they act a little like a spring and a little like a thick fluid. This dual quality, viscosity plus elasticity, allows them to store and return energy, absorb shock, and adapt to force over time. One of my coaches actually described it like this. If you jump into water from a higher place, there will be more force on the way down, and the water will feel much more solid than if you were to dip your toe in and gradually get in the water from the ground level. This is a great example of how your tendons work too. When you do fast movements with a greater force, your tendons harden up and shorten. When you slow the tempo down and gradually move into something like a squat or a split squat with a slower, more controlled tempo, your tendons will naturally open up and reshape over time the more you do that. But surprisingly, no one is really talking about this as it relates to tendon ability. It's not that faster movements are bad for your tendons, but rather your tendons need to be trained for them. And if your tendons are starting from a shortened, weaker position, a more dynamic movement could potentially injure you. So how do we prevent injuries from happening and make our tendons stronger? Our tendons and the joint itself need stimulation in the form of pressure. There's something called the piezoelectric effect. This is when your body's tissues such as bone, tendons, ligaments, made of collagen and elastin generate electrical signals when subjected to mechanical stress. And your tendons are what connect your muscle to your bone. So this biopiezoelectricity is involved in natural processes like bone healing and tissue repair, where mechanical forces are converted into electrical energy that influences cellular activity. So understanding this phenomenon and process in your body is gold, because now you become aware of your own healing potential and the regenerative qualities your tendons possess. For example, I've been working on short range and full range knee bending the better part of this year, and I've noticed my knee not only moves better with no cracking and painful popping, but the deep groove from where they removed a part of my patella tendon to reattach my ACL is now filled in. I had that deep groove for years, and to my surprise, I've just noticed that more tendon tissue has grown there and actually filled that groove in. So it's really amazing to realize that your tendons have the ability to not only repair, but to also regrow. And there's been great research geared toward our tendons' ability to heal on its own without surgical intervention, because tendon tissue has the ability to regenerate itself through the piezoelectric effect. Let's talk about the difference between joint pressure and pain, because a lot of my clients have a hard time distinguishing these two things. So there is a difference between joint pressure, discomfort, and pain. And this is a discussion I do have frequently with my clients, because I've found that many of them aren't aware there's a difference at all. We've been taught for so long that pressure in the joint is bad. And so we associate it with pain. We also associate it with something that's not good for the knee joint, or that it'll lead to something worse. But the truth is it's not, because we know about the piezoelectric effect in our joints. And I've mentioned in a previous episode that there was one study done back in the 70s where they distinguished that more knee bend equates to more pressure in the knee. And so they concluded that pressure in the knee was bad. So now we have all these universities for decades telling trainers, physical therapists, and doctors that knees over toes is bad for your knees. And so let's avoid it at all costs. No questions asked. But what we're discovering more and more is that people are experiencing more knee pain in our technological age because they're not bending their knees at full capacity and they're sitting too much. So pressure in the knee is not bad, it's actually essential. The question now becomes, where do we begin with the right kind of pressure in the knees? How do we start there? And I'll say that many of my clients too have found really great results from implementing a lot of these short range movements in the very beginning of their training. And that tells me that the pressure is the key to knee health and regeneration. So we begin with short range movements that intentionally load the knee to increase blood flow, stimulate regeneration, and create thicker, stronger tendons. Over time, this short-range work helps reform and lengthen the tendon so it's more resilient. This approach is especially powerful for runners dealing with knee pain, shin splints, and overuse injuries. From there, we progress into mid-range strength and build strength in the mid-range of the squat and split squat. And finally, we move into full-range training, putting the most pressure in the knees, creating structural balance between the quads and the hamstrings. The full range of motion allows you to have more strength at the bottom range where most people don't explore. And this is what sets the stage for real knee resilience. And even though I personally can perform a full range squat now, which is amazing, I'm really taken aback by that because I could not bend my knee about a year ago fully. I still do my short range work about 2 to 3 times a week. It keeps my knees healthy, and it's something you can do much more frequently than the heavy full range squat training. I may do heavy squats about once or twice a week, and then I'll do my short range and mid range work most days. Other days I'll work into a lighter slant board squat to keep the tendons moving well to stimulate synovial fluid and blood flow in the joint. I always start my clients with movements like the sled pull and backwards walking. These are great low stakes movements that will help to regenerate the knee and get that blood flow in the knee. Backward walking also lengthens and strengthens the hamstrings, which are essential for knee stability and strength. It's probably one of my favorite exercises to start my clients with. It's something also that just about anyone can do. And I find that most people have very weak hamstrings as well, very weak and tight. So this is something you can do to lengthen and create strength in the hamstring that is very accessible. And the great thing about it too is that we can scale it to anyone's current level of ability. Backward walking in the park with a partner, backward walking in a pool, or just using a sled or treadmill to backward walk. Another gem of a move is the Patrick step. This is highly underrated, and for most of my clients in the beginning, this is very challenging. This is the start of getting our knee bending properly over the toe again, recreating the pressure in the knee a person experiences when walking down a hill or going down the stairs. Once my client can master the Patrick step at the ground level without pain, we move on to the Poliquin step, which is the same as the Patrick step, just with an elevated heel. This will take the pressure in the knee to the next level to build resilient strength. I warm up with this move myself and use it for my clients' warm up too. It's really amazing for tendon adaptation. While we're doing this, we're also building our lower leg strength so we can better handle the forces we put on our knees throughout the day. From going up and down stairs to hiking and running to weightlifting. Your feet and lower legs take a huge amount of the force you put on it during the day, so they need to be very strong. The most humility I've ever felt was when I realized I could barely do 20 ankle raises, but I could squat. So as it relates to programming, when working on tendon strength and ability, we want to initially do high volume and slow tempo sets. For example, with the ankle and toe raises, you can essentially do these every day if you wanted to. There needs to be a lot of volume and a lot of consistency with these movements so you can build a high level of resilience in your lower leg strength, because they are essentially combating the forces as you bend your knee, and they contribute to the degree your knee can bend too. They're kind of like your shock absorbers, so they need to retain as much elasticity as possible. You could do this with the Patrick and Poliquin step too. In the beginning of my knee journey, I did a high volume of elevated split squats and slant board squats just with my body weight. I also did and continue to do a high volume of Poliquin steps. And there's tempo. There's a great debate in the fitness community about tempo. Most fitness influencers are focused on hypertrophy. And while hypertrophy is important, and I'll say it's very possible doing this kind of work to create hypertrophy, because my quads are a great example of that. And you'll see that when you do this kind of work, your quads will start popping. The main reason we want to work with tempo is for the tendons, not necessarily muscular hypertrophy, although it can be a side effect of this as your tendons get stronger, because then your muscles can handle more load. So it's kind of an indirect effect of that, right? But like I mentioned earlier, your tendons have a viscoelasticity quality to them. So if you modify the tempo to go slower and more controlled over time, your tendons will be able to adapt and lengthen while preventing injury. And this is why it's important as we get older. So since your tendons are what connect your muscle to your bone, they can grow too, just like your muscle, yet much slower, because they don't get as much blood flow as your muscle does. That's why we have to have volume there. So adjusting the tempo on a squat, for example, can train you to control the descent with a 4-second count, hold the bottom range for 1 to 2 seconds, and then come up with power for 1 second. This demonstrates a high level of control, dexterity, and power in the joints. And it not only teaches your body how to control a load down, it makes your tendons stronger too. So this is how tendon ability relates to knee pain. From pain to pain-free knees and into strong, resilient knees, it all starts with tendon ability. Becoming so important, especially in midlife. Your tendons can grow, adapt, and remodel, but only if you train them for it. And if this is resonating with you, I'm offering a 6-week in-person small group training series called Knee Ability for Runners in Portland, Oregon, from January 7th to February 11th. We'll be working on short range, mid-range, and full range knee strength and rebuilding our lower leg resilience so running feels good again. For demonstrations and tutorials on these exercises that I described today, check out my YouTube channel. I'll leave a link for this and my Knee Ability for Runners event in the podcast description for you. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll talk with you all again real soon.